He sat at a corner table, the weight of the world pressing down on him, though the restaurant was buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. The dim lighting reflected off the polished marble floors, but it could not illuminate the loneliness etched across his sharp features. In that crowded room, surrounded by strangers sharing joy and connection, Matthew Hayes felt invisible. Billionaire, philanthropist, and a man whose name appeared in headlines more than once a week. Yet none of that mattered tonight. Tonight, the wealth, power, and influence he had built over decades felt hollow. The carefully tailored suit, the crisp tie, even the subtle scent of cologne, none of it could disguise the emptiness gnawing at him. He stared at the menu without seeing it, sipping the water as if it could wash away the gnawing ache of isolation. In a life that had demanded constant hustle, endless networking, and sacrifices that others couldn't imagine, Matthew had gained everything materially, but lost what mattered most, real human connection. Friends were rare, family distant, and his romantic attempts had all crumbled under the weight of his ambition. People admired him, yes, but they didn't know him. They didn't see the nights he cried alone in his penthouse, the fear that one day, all the wealth in the world wouldn't be enough to fill the void in his heart. If you believe in kindness and second chances, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. The restaurant's warmth contrasted sharply with the cold he felt inside. Servers moved gracefully between tables, carrying trays of artfully plated dishes, couples and groups chatting with laughter that pierced through his solitude. Matthew tried to focus on the subtle details around him, the gleam of crystal glasses, the aroma of roasted herbs, but the world seemed distant, muffled, as if he were underwater, trapped in a bubble of silence. He had learned to master everything. Stocks, real estate, mergers, acquisitions, but mastery of the human heart had eluded him. And the irony was unbearable, here he was, surrounded by life and light, yet completely unseen. As he sat, a hush seemed to fall over him, not from anyone noticing him, but from the weight of his own reflection. His phone sat next to his plate, buzzing intermittently with messages from assistants, investors, and distant acquaintances, all demanding attention he didn't have the heart to give. Every notification was a reminder of a life controlled, managed, and perfected on the outside, but aching and chaotic on the inside. Matthew's fingers hovered over the phone, but he didn't answer. What was the point? He wanted connection, not contracts. He wanted laughter, not loyalty agreements. Then, through the haze of his melancholy, a voice cut sharply, unmistakable, tender yet urgent. Matthew. He looked up, startled, scanning the room as heads turned, confused. The voice came again, firmer this time, carrying across the room like a lifeline. A woman, tall, with chestnut hair cascading over her shoulders, wearing a simple yet elegant green dress that complemented her warm eyes, was walking toward him. The restaurant seemed to blur around her, the chatter fading until it was just the sound of her footsteps and the pounding of his own heart. For a moment, Matthew couldn't breathe. It was a name, a voice, a presence that cut through years of isolation. Her name was Rachel Thompson, a woman he hadn't seen in over 10 years. Once a bright, determined young professional who had worked for his company in a junior position, Rachel had left unexpectedly, seeking her own path. He remembered her courage, her laugh, the way she never let him intimidate her with his authority. And now, she was here, standing before him, looking at him not with awe or fear, but with recognition. Recognition of the man he was, not the man the world thought him to be. Rachel smiled, her eyes softening as she approached. She did not hesitate, did not judge the weight he carried on his shoulders. She simply sat down across from him and placed her hand lightly over his, a gesture so small, yet so monumental. For the first time in years, Matthew felt a warmth he hadn't known he had been craving. It was a reminder that life was not about the empires we build or the headlines we make, but about moments of connection that anchor us to humanity. The conversation began awkwardly, stilted at first, as they navigated the years of distance, the miscommunications, and the decisions that had kept them apart. But slowly, effortlessly, the ice melted. They spoke of their dreams, their regrets, the loneliness they had both endured despite outward success. Matthew listened as Rachel spoke, and he realized something profound: the world he had conquered meant nothing without someone to share it with. It was in her presence, her genuine curiosity about him, that he finally felt seen. Outside, the city light sparkled like 1,000 tiny promises, and inside, the restaurant hummed with life. Yet for Matthew, the rest of the world faded, irrelevant in the face of this unexpected reconnection. He realized that the loneliness that had plagued him was not a punishment for ambition but a challenge, an opportunity to rediscover the essence of life he had overlooked. Rachel's arrival was a reminder that even in a life meticulously planned, serendipity could still break through. They laughed, they shared memories, and slowly, Matthew felt the heavy burden of his solitude lift. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who had no idea of the drama unfolding at the corner table, Matthew Hayes felt alive again. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he had been given a second chance, not just with Rachel, but with himself. As the evening drew on, the restaurant gradually emptied, but Matthew and Rachel remained, immersed in conversation that flowed naturally, without pretense. The billionaire who had once stood alone in a crowded room now sat beside someone who reminded him of the joy of being truly known. The emptiness he had carried for so long was slowly replaced with hope, warmth, and a fragile yet undeniable sense of belonging. Near the end of the evening, as they prepared to leave, Matthew realized the simple truth he had ignored for decades: wealth and status could build empires, but only human connection could build a life worth living. And sometimes, life's most profound gifts arrived in the form of a voice calling your name when you least expected it, cutting through the noise of everything else. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and share. And I'd love it if you leave a comment just before ending this video. Tell me how this story made you feel, because your thoughts matter. Matthew walked out of the restaurant that night with a renewed spirit. The neon lights of the city flickered around him, no longer harsh or overwhelming, but vibrant and full of possibility. For the first time in years, he did not feel the crushing weight of isolation. Instead, he felt the quiet strength of knowing that connection, kindness, and courage had the power to transform even the loneliest of hearts. And in that moment, Matthew understood that he could finally embrace the life he had always built, not just for himself, but for the possibility of truly sharing it with someone who saw him for who he really was. In a crowded world, it often takes just one voice, one act of recognition, to remind us that we are not alone, and that sometimes, standing alone is the very moment before life gives us a second chance.